The text that destroyed James Parker's life was sent at exactly 3:17 p.m. on a Tuesday. A simple message intended for Anne, the kindergarten teacher who'd agreed to dinner Friday, had somehow slipped into a different text thread. His thumb had betrayed him, tapping the wrong conversation in his hurry between lab prep periods at Roosevelt High. James froze, watching in horror as the blue bubble showed delivered beneath words never meant for Victoria Reynolds, CEO of Reynolds Pharmaceuticals, the woman who held his daughter's life in her hands. Looking forward to Friday. Can't stop thinking about your smile and wondering what it would be like to kiss you. His classroom suddenly felt airless. Tomorrow's meeting with Reynolds Pharmaceuticals Clinical Trial Committee was his last chance, his absolutely final opportunity to get 8-year-old Lily into their experimental treatment program for Harrington syndrome. 4 months of applications, 3 rejections, countless nights researching every angle, all potentially ruined by 13 careless words sent to a woman known throughout the business world as the Ice Queen. James dropped into his desk chair, the ancient metal creaking beneath his weight. His fingers trembled as he typed frantically. "Miss Reynolds, I sincerely apologize. That message was meant for someone else. Please disregard." Regarding tomorrow's appointment, he deleted the half-formed excuse. What could he possibly say? That he was a single father juggling a sick child, a teaching joy, and the occasional pathetic attempt at a social life? That he couldn't even manage to text the right person? Students' footsteps echoed in the hall, reminding him that 5th period was about to begin. James silenced his phone and shoved it in his desk drawer. 30 teenagers would soon flood his classroom, expecting him to explain chemical reactions while his own life was combusting. He straightened his worn blue button-down shirt, ran a hand through his dark hair, increasingly streaked with premature gray at 36, and forced himself to breathe. Fix what you can fix, control what you can control. The mantra that had kept him functioning since Sarah's death 4 years ago. The rest of the school day passed in a fog. James moved mechanically through his lesson on molecular bonds, his mind cycling through worst-case scenarios. Would Reynolds Pharmaceuticals cancel tomorrow's appeal hearing? Would Victoria Reynolds herself block Lily's application out of disgust? Without this treatment program, the aggressive autoimmune disorder would continue its relentless attack on his daughter's body. Conventional treatments were failing. The medical bills had already forced them to sell their family home for this smaller place in the suburbs. His teacher's insurance covered the basics, but experimental treatments were financially out of reach without the clinical trial. The bell finally rang at 3:45 p.m. James dismissed his students, his forced smile dropping the moment they filed out. He retrieved his phone, heart sinking when he saw no response from Victoria Reynolds. Was that better or worse than outright rejection? His thumb hovered over the screen, contemplating another message. But what more could he say? The drive home took 23 minutes. James counted each one, trying to focus on the road rather than the catastrophe he'd created. Mrs. Winters, their elderly neighbor who watched Lily after school, would need to leave soon for her bridge game. Life's ordinary rhythms continuing while his world potentially collapsed. James pulled into the driveway of the small ranch house at exactly 4:22 p.m. The front yard needed mowing, another task he hadn't found time for between Lily's doctor appointments and grading lab reports. 5 minutes to get himself together before facing his daughter. 5 minutes to bury his panic beneath the steady father persona Lily needed. A sleek black Audi was parked at the curb. James squinted, unfamiliar with the vehicle. Perhaps Mrs. Winters had a visitor? He gathered his weathered messenger bag and trudged toward the front door, fishing for his keys. The doorbell rang at precisely 4:27 p.m., exactly 70 minutes after his catastrophic texting error. James had just stepped inside, calling out for Lily, when the chime echoed through the modest house. He tossed his bag onto the cluttered dining table and moved to answer, expecting perhaps a package delivery. Victoria Reynolds stood on his front porch. James froze, hand still on the doorknob. The woman from magazine covers and pharmaceutical industry profiles was standing on his worn welcome mat, beneath the porch light he'd been meaning to fix for months. In person, she was both more and less intimidating than her photos. Taller than he'd expected, dressed in a tailored navy suit that probably cost more than his monthly mortgage payment. Her blonde hair was pulled back in a precise knot, but strands had escaped, softening her appearance. Something about her seemed almost human. The 5-foot distance between them felt electrically charged. Her piercing blue eyes assessed him without revealing anything in return. Mr. Parker. Her voice was unexpectedly soft, with a hint of something he couldn't identify. I believe we need to discuss the message you sent me. James felt heat rush to his face. The familiar sensation of being caught unprepared, like showing up for an exam having studied the wrong material. Mr. Reynolds, I am so incredibly sorry. That text was never meant. She held up one perfectly manicured hand, stopping his fumbling apology. May I come in? I think we have more to discuss than just an errant text message. Confusion momentarily overrode his embarrassment. More to discuss? James stepped aside automatically, a habit of politeness that operated independently from his stunned brain. Victoria Reynolds crossed his threshold, entering a world utterly removed from her corporate headquarters. The modest living room told the story of their lives in uncomfortable clarity. Lily's stuffed animals occupied one corner of the sofa. A basket of unfolded laundry sat on the coffee table. Science textbooks and medical journals were stacked beside his reading chair. Breakfast dishes still sat in the sink. He'd been so focused on preparing for tomorrow's meeting that housekeeping had fallen by the wayside. Daddy, who's here? Lily appeared in the hallway, her small frame swimming in 2 large unicorn pajamas, fuzzy slippers on her feet despite the afternoon hour. Her once thick brown hair was now thin from treatments, her skin paler than it should be. But her eyes, James's eyes, people always said, remained bright with curiosity, untouched by the disease attacking her body. What happened next left James speechless. Victoria Reynolds, the woman whose ruthless business tactics had earned her the nickname the Ice Queen, knelt down to Lily's level, designer suit be damned. Hello there, I'm Victoria. I work at the company that makes medicine. Her voice had transformed completely, warm and gentle where moments before it had been controlled and professional. No condescension, no baby talk, just a direct introduction adjusted for a child's understanding. Lily took a step closer, studying the visitor with unconcealed interest. Are you the lady who can help make me better? The directness only children possess. James felt his chest tighten. Victoria's composed expression faltered for just a moment, a flash of something raw and genuine breaking through her professional veneer. I'm certainly going to try, she said, and James could have sworn her eyes glistened momentarily. Would it be okay if I talk to your dad for a little while? Lily nodded solemnly. I'm watching a show about sea monsters. Mrs. Winters said I could have one more episode before dinner. She looked at James for confirmation. That's fine, Lil. I'll call you when dinner's ready. After Lily retreated to her room, Victoria stood, smoothing her suit with practiced hands. The business executive was back, though something in her eyes had changed. Your daughter is the reason you have been trying to meet with my company for the past 4 months. Not a question, a statement of fact. James nodded, professional mode engaging automatically. Yes, Lily has Harrington syndrome. Your company's experimental treatment is showing the most promise, but we've been denied entry into the trial 3 times. Tomorrow's appeal was our last chance. Victoria's gaze traveled around the modest home, taking in the family photos, the medical bills stacked on the counter, the calendar on the wall marked with hospital appointments. You're raising her alone? Her mother died when Lily was 4, car accident. The words still felt raw even after 4 years. Look, about that text. The text is why I'm here, Victoria interrupted, her voice suddenly businesslike again. Mr. Parker, I received your message during a board meeting. I excused myself to read your file, and what I found disturbed me greatly. She pulled out a slim tablet from her designer handbag, tapping efficiently until she found what she was looking for. She turned the screen toward him, showing his application history with Reynolds Pharmaceuticals. Your case should have been prioritized months ago. Someone buried it deliberately. James felt like the floor had dropped out from under him. What? Why would anyone do that? That's exactly what I intend to find out. Victoria's expression hardened. But first, I want to hear about Lily. Not from a clinical file, but from her father. James ran his hand through his hair, the stress of the past years visible in the premature gray at his temples. The weight of being both mother and father to a seriously ill child etched into the lines around his warm hazel eyes. I don't even know where to begin, he said, gesturing for her to sit at the small kitchen table. Coffee? Victoria nodded, setting her handbag on the chair beside her. Up close, James noticed details about her that never appeared in business magazines. A small scar near her right eyebrow, the slight asymmetry of her smile, the way she tucked a strand of hair behind her ear when she was thinking. At 42, Victoria Reynolds had built an empire, but sitting in his cluttered kitchen, she seemed more approachable than her reputation suggested. Lily was always healthy until she turned 6, James began, placing a mug of coffee in front of Victoria. She came home from school with a fever one day. We thought it was just a cold, but it never went away. His voice caught. Then came the joint pain, the rashes, the constant infections. 3 doctors, and 6 months later, we finally got the diagnosis: Harrington syndrome. Victoria listened intently as James described the rare autoimmune disorder that caused Lily's immune system to attack her own tissues. He explained the failed treatments, the hospitalizations, the way Lily's once boundless energy had diminished as the disease progressed. She used to dance, he said softly, showing Victoria a photo on his phone of a younger, healthier Lily in a ballet costume. Now she gets winded walking to the mailbox. The standard immunosuppressants help with the symptoms but cause other problems. Your company's targeted therapy is the first real hope we've had. Victoria's perfectly composed facade cracked slightly as she studied the photo. And you've been denied entry to the trial 3 times? Yes, first they said her case wasn't severe enough. Then they said it was too severe. The last rejection just said not eligible with no explanation. James's frustration was evident. Tomorrow's appeal was our last shot. I was going to bring in all her medical records, letters from her doctors, anything to convince them. Victoria's blue eyes flashed with something that looked like anger. You shouldn't have had to fight this hard. She pulled out her phone and sent a rapid-fire text, her fingers moving with practiced efficiency. I'm having my assistant pull every communication about Lily's case. I want to know exactly who made these decisions and why. James watched her, trying to reconcile this woman with the corporate ice queen he'd researched obsessively in preparation for tomorrow's appeal. Her reputation for ruthless efficiency in business was legendary. Nothing in his research had suggested she would personally involve herself in a single patient's case. I don't understand, he said finally. Why are you doing this? Why come to my house? Victoria set down her coffee cup, considering her words carefully. Your text message arrived during a particularly contentious board meeting. The timing was unusual. It made me curious about who would send something so personal to my direct number. When I saw it was connected to a clinical trial applicant, I became concerned. It wasn't a complete answer. James sensed there was more, but he wasn't in a position to push. Mrs. Winters appeared in the kitchen doorway, her silver hair in its usual neat perm, surprise evident on her kind face at finding a stranger in the Parker kitchen. James made quick introductions, thanked her for watching Lily, and walked her to the door. When he returned, Victoria was examining a science fair certificate hanging on the wall. First place district competition, she noted. Lily's project? Yes, the effects of different sugar types on yeast fermentation. She designed the experiment herself. Pride momentarily displaced his anxiety. She's brilliant, always has been. The disease hasn't touched that, at least. Victoria nodded, something like approval in her expression. You're a science teacher. It shows in her thinking process. I try to keep her mind engaged, even when her body can't keep up. James leaned against the counter. Some days are better than others. A comfortable silence settled between them, surprising in its lack of tension. Victoria broke it first. I'd like to see Lily's complete medical records, if you don't mind. The files we have seem to be selectively edited. James nodded, retrieving a thick folder from a cabinet. Years of test results, treatment protocols, and doctor's notes meticulously organized. He'd become an expert on his daughter's disease out of necessity, learning medical terminology and treatment options with the same dedication he brought to teaching chemistry. Victoria studied the records with professional focus, occasionally asking clarifying questions that revealed her own deep understanding of autoimmune disorders. James answered each precisely, falling into the rhythm of a scientific discussion rather than a desperate plea for help. This treatment trial, James said after a while, I've read every published paper. The preliminary results for children in Lily's age range with early to moderate progression are promising. 80% reduction in inflammatory markers, significant tissue recovery in 60% of cases. If we could just get her in. Victoria closed the file, a decision visibly made. Mr. Parker, I'm adding Lily to the treatment program, effective immediately. I'll have the paperwork delivered tomorrow. James nearly dropped the glass of water he'd been drinking. Just like that? But we've been trying for months. Victoria's expression darkened. Yes, and I'll be addressing that internal failure tomorrow. Someone deliberately obstructed your application, and I intend to find out who and why. She closed her tablet with a decisive click. But that's not your concern. Your concern is Lily, and I promise you, she will get the treatment she needs. The sudden shift from desperation to hope made James lightheaded. He gripped the counter, steadying himself. I don't know how to thank you. Don't thank me yet. The treatment is still experimental. There are risks, side effects, regular monitoring required. Her professional tone was back, but her eyes remained softer than before. I'll send a car for you and Lily on Monday morning. The first treatment will take several hours. James nodded, years of cautious hope making him hesitant to fully embrace this sudden turn of fortune. I'll need to arrange for a substitute teacher. Already taken care of. My assistant will contact your school administration tomorrow. Victoria's efficiency was both impressive and slightly unnerving. All expenses related to Lily's treatment will be covered by the program, including your lost work hours. James felt a flash of pride-fueled resistance. I can manage my own. This isn't charity, Mr. Parker. It's standard protocol for all participants. Victoria cut him off with practiced ease, correctly reading his hesitation. Your participation in the trial is valuable to our research. Compensating you for your time is simply good business. The way she framed it, as an exchange rather than a handout, made it easier for James to accept. Still, the sudden reversal of their situation left him struggling to process. Yesterday, he'd been preparing for a desperate last appeal. Today, the CEO of Reynolds Pharmaceuticals was standing in his kitchen, arranging for Lily's treatment to begin. Why don't I meet Lily properly? Victoria suggested, gathering her things. I'd like to explain the treatment process to her in terms she can understand. Children do better with medical procedures when they comprehend what's happening. James led her to Lily's room, knocking gently on the door decorated with solar system stickers. Lily was sitting cross-legged on her bed, surrounded by books about marine biology, her current obsession. The television was on, but she was more interested in a detailed drawing of a giant squid. Lily, Ms. Reynolds would like to talk with you about the new medicine. Lily looked up, her intelligent eyes assessing Victoria with unconcealed curiosity. Did you make the medicine yourself? Victoria smiled, a genuine expression that transformed her face. Not personally, but I have a whole team of scientists who did, and I make sure they have everything they need to do their work. Like how Dad makes sure we have everything for science experiments at home? Lily asked, making connections in the way James recognized as her analytical mind at work. Exactly like that, Victoria agreed, sitting carefully on the edge of Lily's bed. May I see what you're reading? For the next 20 minutes, James watched in amazement as Victoria Reynolds, feared corporate executive, engaged his daughter in a conversation about giant squids, seamlessly transitioning into an explanation of how the new medicine would work. She used analogies involving Lily's beloved sea creatures to explain complex immunological concepts, never talking down to the child. So the medicine is like a special team of tiny octopuses? Lily asked, following the metaphor Victoria had crafted. They have 8 arms to grab onto the bad cells, but they know not to grab the good cells? That's a perfect way to think about it, Victoria confirmed. And just like scientists have to study octopuses to understand how smart they are, we'll need to do regular tests to see how smart your medicine is being in your body. Lily nodded solemnly. Will it hurt? Victoria didn't offer false reassurances. Some parts might be uncomfortable. There will be blood tests and IV lines, but we have special doctors and nurses who work with children, and they're very good at making it as easy as possible. James leaned against the doorframe, a familiar tightness in his chest as he watched his daughter absorb this information. Lily had grown up too quickly, forced by illness to understand concepts no child should have to face. Yet she remained resilient, her spirit unbroken. Dad says I'm brave, Lily told Victoria, a hint of pride in her voice. He says I'm the bravest person he knows. I believe that completely, Victoria replied, her professional demeanor softening further. And bravery doesn't mean you're not scared. It means you do important things even when you are scared. Lily considered this, then nodded decisively. I want to try the octopus medicine. Then we'll start on Monday, Victoria confirmed, standing. I'll be there with you and your dad for the first treatment. This surprised James. You will? Of course, Victoria said, as if the CEO of a pharmaceutical company personally attending a treatment was perfectly normal. I want to ensure everything goes smoothly. As they walked back to the front door, James struggled to find the right words. Mr. Reynolds, I still don't understand why you're doing this. Not that I'm not grateful, but some things are complicated, Mr. Parker. Let's leave it at that for now. Victoria reached for the doorknob, then hesitated. There is one more thing. The board meeting I was in when your text arrived, we were discussing budget cuts to the rare disease division. Some members feel it is not profitable enough compared to more common conditions. James felt a chill. And what do you think? I think some things are more important than profit margins. A shadow crossed her face. But I'm increasingly in the minority. The pharmaceutical industry has changed since I founded Reynolds 15 years ago. She opened the door, stepping onto the porch into the early evening light. Monday morning, 8 a.m., a car will pick you up. My personal cell number is already in your phone. I took the liberty of adding it when I saw your message. A hint of amusement flickered across her face. Feel free to contact me with any questions about Lily's treatment, though perhaps save the comments about kissing for after we've actually met properly. James felt his face flush again, but her tone had been more teasing than reprimanding. As Victoria walked toward her Audi, phone already at her ear managing some new crisis, James called after her. How did you know where I lived? My address isn't in the application materials. Victoria paused, turning back. I'm the CEO of a major pharmaceutical company, Mr. Parker. Finding information is rarely a challenge. With that enigmatic response, she slipped into her car and drove away. James closed the door, leaning against it as the events of the past hour caught up with him. His catastrophic text message error had somehow resulted in his daughter getting the treatment she desperately needed. It made no logical sense. The Victoria Reynolds he'd researched would never have responded this way. Something else was happening, something he couldn't yet see. Dad, is the lady gone? Lily appeared in the hallway, her science book clutched to her chest. I like her. She doesn't talk to me like I'm a baby. She's gone for now, but we'll see her again on Monday. James pushed himself away from the door, forcing a normal routine despite the extraordinary circumstances. How about dinner? Spaghetti sound good? With extra cheese? Lily negotiated, already heading toward the kitchen. And can we have ice cream after? Extra cheese, definitely. Ice cream, we'll see. James followed the familiar rhythm of their evening ritual, providing stability in a suddenly shifting world. Later, after Lily had gone to bed, James sat at his computer, searching for more information about Victoria Reynolds. Beyond the corporate profiles and business news, personal details were scarce. Founded Reynolds Pharmaceuticals 15 years ago, MBA from Harvard. Divorced, no children. Notoriously private. Nothing that explained her unexpected personal interest in Lily's case. The treatment program paperwork arrived via courier at 7 o'clock a.m. the next morning, along with a handwritten note on heavy cream stationery. Treatment starts Monday. Don't worry about transportation. A car will pick you up at 8 o'clock a.m. Mim. My personal cell is included if you have any questions. V. James spent Friday and the weekend preparing Lily for the treatment, explaining the process in terms she could understand, careful not to build unrealistic expectations while fostering hope. They made a special trip to the bookstore for new reading material to occupy her during the long hours of infusion. Lily chose books about astronomy, her interest oscillating between ocean depths and star-filled skies. Do you think Ms. Reynolds knows about stars? Lily asked as they drove home, new books piled in her lap. She knew a lot about octopuses. I'm not sure, James answered honestly. We could ask her on Monday. I'm going to show her my constellation book, Lily decided matter-of-factly. She should know about stars, too. They're important. James smiled at his daughter's certainty. At 8, Lily's worldview was still wonderfully straightforward. Things were important or they weren't. People were kind or they weren't. The complexity of adult motivations, the layers of personal and professional agendas, hadn't yet entered her understanding. Monday morning arrived with a gray drizzle that matched James's cautious mood. Hope was dangerous. He'd learned that lesson repeatedly over the past 2 years as treatment after treatment failed to halt Lily's disease progression. Yet watching Lily carefully select her favorite sweater and jeans for the hospital visit, he couldn't suppress a flicker of optimism. Precisely at 8 o'clock a.m., a black car pulled up outside their house. To James's surprise, Victoria herself stepped out, dressed more casually than he'd seen her before, tailored black pants and a simple blue blouse, her blonde hair loose around her shoulders. She carried a small umbrella, which she held over Lily as they walked to the car. "Good morning," she said, her smile warming her entire face. "I thought I'd accompany you both today. First days can be intimidating." Lily, who had been nervous all morning, immediately brightened at the sight of Victoria. "You came. Dad said you might." Victoria knelt to Lily's level, seemingly unconcerned about creasing her expensive clothes on the wet driveway. "I wouldn't miss it, and I brought you something." She handed Lily a small gift bag. Inside was a beautiful journal with a night sky cover spangled with silver constellations. "It's for recording your journey," Victoria explained. "Good days, interesting observations, questions for the doctors. Scientific research needs good notes." Lily clutched the journal to her chest. "Thank you. I just got a new book about constellations. Do you know about stars?" "A little," Victoria admitted, "but probably not as much as you do. Perhaps you can teach me." In the car, Victoria explained the treatment process to both of them, breaking down complex medical terminology into language Lily could understand without talking down to her. James watched in amazement as his daughter, normally shy around strangers, peppered Victoria with questions that the CEO answered with infinite patience. "Why are you doing all this?" James asked quietly while Lily was distracted by the tablet Victoria had brought for her, loaded with educational games. "Coming yourself, bringing gifts. This is far beyond professional courtesy." Victoria's expression shuddered briefly. "Let's focus on getting Lily settled with the treatment first. There will be time for other conversations later." At the hospital, James expected Victoria to hand them off to the medical staff and return to her corporate duties. Instead, she stayed through the entire admissions process, efficiently clearing administrative hurdles that would have taken James hours to navigate. When a nurse had trouble finding a vein for Lily's IV, Victoria held the little girl's hand and told her about a time she'd gotten lost while hiking in Montana, distracting Lily from the discomfort with a story about following stars to find her way back to camp. The treatment room was more comfortable than James had expected. Bright colors, child-friendly decorations, a television mounted on the wall playing nature documentaries. Victoria worked remotely from her laptop during the 4-hour infusion, occasionally stepping out for urgent calls, but always returning to Lily's side. When Lily fell asleep during the treatment, Victoria quietly covered her with a blanket, her touch gentle and maternal in a way that made James's heart ache with memories of Sarah doing the same when Lily was smaller. "You don't have to stay," James said softly as they watched Lily sleep. "I'm sure you have more important things to do." Victoria looked at him with surprise. "More important than this?" She shook her head. "Maze, I've spent 15 years building a company to create treatments like this. Watching them actually help a child, that's the most important thing I could possibly do today." The use of his first name didn't escape his notice. Somewhere in the past few hours, they'd crossed from formal to familiar territory. "Still," he persisted, "a CEO personally overseeing a single patient's treatment, it's unusual." Victoria was silent for a moment, her gaze fixed on Lily's sleeping form. When she finally spoke, her voice was so quiet James had to lean closer to hear. "My younger sister had Harrington syndrome 20 years ago, before there were any effective treatments." The revelation hit James like a physical blow. Suddenly, Victoria's personal involvement made sense. "I'm so sorry," he said, the inadequacy of the words painfully apparent. "I had no idea." "It's not in my company bio," Victoria confirmed, her perfectly composed facade cracking slightly. "Some things are too personal for corporate websites." She straightened in her chair, visibly rebuilding her professional armor. Sophia was 12 when she died. I was 17 and promised her I'd find a way to help other children like her. She looked toward Lily's bed. Children like your daughter. The weight of this revelation settled between them. James saw Victoria Reynolds in an entirely new light, not just the ice queen of business legend, but a woman driven by personal loss, fulfilling a promise made to a sister who never had the chances they were now fighting to give Lily. That's why you founded Reynolds Pharmaceuticals, James said, pieces falling into place. To develop treatments for rare diseases. Victoria nodded. Other companies ignore them because they're not profitable enough. I built Reynolds differently. Research first, profit second. At least that was the original mission. A shadow crossed her face. Things change. Companies grow. Shareholders demand returns. James understood then what she'd meant yesterday about being in the minority regarding the rare disease division. She was fighting battles within her own company to maintain the vision that had driven her to build it. Victoria's phone buzzed with an incoming message. She glanced at it, her expression shifting from open vulnerability to something harder. I need to make a call. Do you mind? James gestured toward the hall. Take your time. Through the treatment room's glass wall, he watched as Victoria paced the corridor, her posture rigid as she spoke into her phone. Even from a distance, he could see the transformation. The warm, compassionate woman who had sat beside Lily was gone, replaced by the formidable CEO whose reputation struck fear into pharmaceuticals executives across the country. Her free hand gestured sharply as she spoke, her expression intense. This was the Victoria Reynolds the business world knew. Commanding, uncompromising, fierce. Yet now James had seen beneath that exterior to the woman who carried childhood grief as her driving force. When she returned, some of that intensity lingered in her eyes. I've just spoken with my head of clinical trials. There appears to have been interference in Lily's case, someone with a personal agenda. What kind of interference? James asked, alarmed. Victoria hesitated, choosing her words carefully. My ex-husband sits on the board. He oversees the clinical trial division. It seems he's been selective about which cases receive approval. James felt his stomach drop. Your ex-husband blocked my daughter's treatment? Why would he do that? Because he knew it would matter to me, Victoria said quietly. He's been bitter since our divorce 3 years ago. He knows how personal the Harringtons' research is to me because of Sophia. Her composed expression faltered for a moment. I never imagined he would stoop to using patients as pawns in his vendetta against me. James struggled to process this information. So if I hadn't sent that text by mistake, if you hadn't personally seen our case, he would have continued blocking Lily's application, and you might never have known about it, Victoria finished. Corporate bureaucracy is very effective at burying things. The realization that his daughter's life had been caught in the crossfire of a corporate power struggle made James feel sick. That's monstrous. Yes, Victoria agreed, her voice hard, and he will be removed from the board by this time tomorrow. I've already called an emergency meeting. She looked at James with unexpected gentleness. But none of that matters for Lily. What matters is that she starts treatment immediately. She nodded toward the IV drip. The first dose is already working. Lily stirred then, eyes blinking open slowly. Dad? Is it done? James moved to her side, smoothing her thin hair back from her forehead. Not quite yet, sweetheart. About another hour. Lily noticed Victoria standing nearby. Did you see the octopus documentary? There was a giant one that glows in the dark. Victoria's transformation back from corporate warrior to Lily's advocate was instantaneous and complete. I missed it, but that sounds fascinating. Why don't you tell me about it while we finish your treatment? The rest of the afternoon passed in a blur of medical instructions, follow-up appointments, and monitoring protocols. Victoria remained with them throughout, ensuring the medical team explained everything clearly and addressing James's concerns before they even fully formed in his mind. As Lily's first treatment concluded, the nursing staff gave James a thick folder of information. Side effects to watch for, dietary recommendations, emergency contacts. Victoria added her own business card, writing her personal cell number on the back. Day or night, she told him firmly. If anything concerns you, call me directly. Outside the hospital, Victoria's driver waited with the car. The rain had stopped, leaving the air fresh and cool. Lily was tired but excited, chattering about the next treatment scheduled for Thursday. "I'm going to finish my octopus book by then," she informed Victoria seriously, "and start my star book, so I can tell you about both." Victoria smiled, that genuine expression that transformed her face. "I'll look forward to it. And don't forget to write in your journal. Scientists need good records." As the driver helped Lily into the car, Victoria turned to James. "She's extraordinary. You've done an amazing job with her, especially under such difficult circumstances." The unexpected praise caught James off guard. "I'm just trying to give her as normal a life as possible while fighting for her future." "That's what makes it extraordinary," Victoria said simply. "Many would have crumbled under the pressure. You've turned it into strength." There was a moment of connection between them, something that transcended their different worlds. Two people united by concern for a child, by personal losses that had shaped them, by a shared understanding of what truly mattered. The moment broke when Victoria's phone rang again. She checked the screen and sighed. "The emergency board meeting. I need to take this." James nodded, understanding the demands of her position. "Thank you for everything." Victoria paused before answering the call. "This is just the beginning, James. We're going to make sure Lily gets everything she needs." With that promise, she stepped away to take the call, already shifting back into CEO mode. During the drive home, Lily fell asleep almost immediately, exhausted from the treatment and the emotional day. James watched the suburban landscape pass outside the window, mind reeling from the revelations. Victoria Reynolds, the ice queen of pharmaceuticals, was fighting a personal battle against the disease that had taken her sister. His daughter had somehow become a focal point in that mission, and Victoria's ex-husband had deliberately blocked Lily's treatment as a way to hurt his former wife. The layers of personal and professional agendas surrounding his daughter's care were dizzying. James had entered this situation thinking only of Lily's health, operating on the naive assumption that medical decisions were made purely on clinical merit. Now he understood that even life-saving treatments existed within webs of corporate politics, personal vendettas, and power struggles. When they arrived home, James carefully carried the sleeping Lily inside and tucked her into bed. He stood watching her for a long moment, the steady rise and fall of her chest, the color already seeming slightly better in her cheeks. Was it his imagination, or could the treatment be showing effects already? Hope, that dangerous, necessary emotion he'd been guarding so carefully, began to expand in his chest. Victoria Reynolds had promised to help, and she had the power to make that promise real. James moved through the quiet house, collecting dishes from breakfast, straightening the living room, restoring order to their small world. Routine helped him process, the physical acts of cleaning giving his mind space to work through the day's revelations. His phone chimed with a text message. "Victoria. Emergency board meeting concluded. Richard removed from clinical trials oversight, effective immediately. Full review of all denied applications underway. Lily's preliminary labs look promising. Rest well, formal, efficient, yet also personal in its attention to Lily's progress." James typed a response, deleted it, typed again. "Thank you. Lily's already talking about showing you her star book on Thursday. We both appreciate everything you're doing." Simple gratitude seemed insufficient for the lifeline she'd thrown them, but anything more elaborate felt awkward across the strange new relationship they were forming. Not quite professional, not quite personal, bridging worlds that rarely intersected. The reply came quickly. "Looking forward to Thursday. Stars are a perfect follow-up to octopuses. Both exist in spaces humans rarely access." An unexpected poetic turn from the corporate executive. James found himself smiling as he set the phone aside and continued restoring order to the living room. A photo on the mantel caught his attention. Lily at age 5 before the illness, laughing on a playground swing, Sarah pushing her higher. The family he'd had, the life they'd planned together, forever altered by a rain-slicked road and a driver checking text messages. James touched the frame gently. "I'm doing my best," he whispered to Sarah's smiling image. "I think we might have caught a break." Sleep came easier that night than it had in months. The constant background hum of anxiety about Lily's future had quieted, at least temporarily. They had access to the treatment now. They had Victoria Reynolds personally invested in Lily's case. For the first time since the diagnosis, James allowed himself to truly hope. Tuesday morning, James returned to his classroom, having arranged for a substitute to cover his Thursday classes when Lily had her second treatment. His students noticed the change in his demeanor, the lessened tension in his shoulders, the occasional smile breaking through his usually focused expression. "You winning the lottery or something, Mr. P?" Marcus asked after correctly balancing a chemical equation on the board, always quickest to notice changes in people. "Better than that," James replied, the rare personal comment slipping out. "Sometimes help comes from unexpected places." The day passed in a blur of lectures and lab demonstrations, James occasionally checking his phone for updates from Mrs. Winters about Lily. Each report was positive: good energy, normal appetite, no concerning side effects. After school, James gathered lab materials for Thursday's substitute, leaving detailed instructions as he always did. In the quiet of his empty classroom, he allowed himself a moment of reflection. For 2 years, he'd been in crisis mode, researching Lily's condition, fighting for treatments, working extra tutoring hours to cover medical expenses, all while maintaining a stable home for his daughter. The constant battle had left little room for anything else. Now, with Victoria's intervention, a small space had opened for something beyond survival, a chance to catch his breath, to focus on Lily's recovery rather than the next desperate appeal. And perhaps an unexpected connection with a woman as complex and layered as Victoria Reynolds. James closed his classroom door, uncertain what tomorrow would bring, but for the first time in years, cautiously optimistic about the future. What he couldn't know as he drove home to Lily was that Victoria Reynolds sat in her expansive corner office, staring at a photo of a dark-haired 12-year-old girl whose resemblance to Lily had struck her the moment she saw the application file. Or that her ex-husband, Richard, was already setting in motion plans to retaliate against her for his removal from the board. Or that the experimental treatment, while promising, carried risks neither of them had fully acknowledged in their rush to give Lily her best chance. The text message that had accidentally connected their worlds had set in motion events neither could predict nor control. For now, it was enough that Lily had hope. James had respite from his desperate battle, and Victoria had a chance to fulfill her promise to a sister long gone. Tomorrow would bring its own challenges, its own revelations, and perhaps its own miracles. Thursday morning arrived with an unexpected brightness that seemed to mirror the cautious optimism in the Parker household. James stood at the kitchen counter preparing Lily's favorite breakfast, blueberry pancakes in the shape of stars, a tradition reserved for special days. The first treatment had gone remarkably well. Lily's energy levels showed subtle improvement, and the mild fever the doctors had warned might appear never materialized. Lily sat at the table with her constellation book open, making notes in the journal Victoria had given her. The sight of his daughter engaged in something beyond her illness lifted a weight James hadn't realized he'd been carrying. "Dad, did you know some stars explode at the end of their lives? They're called supernovas." Lily's voice carried an excitement that had been absent for months. James flipped a pancake with practiced precision. "I did know that. They release more energy in that explosion than our sun will produce in its entire lifetime. I'm going to tell Victoria. She said she doesn't know much about stars." Lily carefully wrote this fact in her journal, tongue caught between her teeth in concentration. The sound of a car pulling up outside signaled their ride to the second treatment. James peered through the kitchen window, half expecting to see Victoria again. But today, it was just the driver in the now familiar black Audi. Lily didn't hide her disappointment when they settled into the back seat without Victoria. "Is she meeting us at the hospital?" "She's a very busy person, Lil. She might not be able to come today." James tried to manage her expectations, though he found himself sharing her disappointment. The hospital's pediatric treatment wing buzzed with Thursday's scheduled patients. As James and Lily approached the reception desk, the coordinator, Nancy, according to her name badge, looked up with recognition. "Lily Parker, we have your room all ready, and Ms. Reynolds called to say she'll be joining you within the hour. She's finishing up a meeting first." Lily's face brightened instantly. "See, Dad? She's coming." James felt a complicated mix of emotions he couldn't quite untangle. Relief that his daughter wouldn't be disappointed, anticipation of seeing Victoria again, a nagging concern about the unusual level of personal attention from the company's CEO. They settled into the treatment room, the nurse efficiently starting Lily's IV with less difficulty than on Monday. As promised, Victoria arrived just as the medication began flowing into Lily's veins. Her appearance today was pure business. Tailored gray suit, hair pulled back severely, expression focused. Yet the moment she entered Lily's room, that focus softened. "I heard someone has star facts to share with me." Victoria set her briefcase aside, moving directly to Lily's bedside. Lily launched into an enthusiastic explanation of supernovas, flipping pages in her book to show Victoria the illustrations. James stepped back, letting them interact, struck by how naturally Victoria adapted to Lily's level without condescension. When Lily became engrossed in the documentary playing on the room's television, Victoria moved to where James stood by the window. The lab results from Monday look promising. Her inflammatory markers are already showing slight improvement. Her voice was low, meant only for him. James nodded, afraid to embrace hope too eagerly. She had more energy yesterday. Even wanted to try a simple science experiment at home. That's excellent. Victoria's professional demeanor slipped slightly, revealing genuine pleasure at this news. The early response can be indicative of overall treatment success. A discreet knock at the door interrupted their conversation. A man in a white lab coat entered, his posture stiffening when he saw Victoria. "Dr. Henderson, thank you for stopping by." Victoria's tone shifted subtly, warmer on the surface but with an unmistakable undercurrent of authority. The doctor nodded tersely. "Ms. Reynolds, I wasn't aware you'd be personally attending this session." His gaze flicked toward James with obvious curiosity. "Dr. Henderson is heading our Harrington syndrome research team," Victoria explained to James. "He'll be overseeing Lily's treatment protocol." James extended his hand. "James Parker, thank you for everything you're doing for my daughter." The doctor's handshake was perfunctory, his attention already shifting back to Victoria. "Could I speak with you privately for a moment?" Victoria nodded, following him into the hallway. Through the glass wall of Lily's room, James watched their interaction. The doctor speaking animatedly, gesturing with his hands. Victoria listening with a neutral expression that gradually hardened into something colder. The conversation concluded abruptly when Victoria glanced at her watch and returned to Lily's room. Dr. Henderson did not follow. "Is everything okay?" James asked quietly while Lily remained absorbed in her program. Victoria's smile didn't reach her eyes. "Just routine administrative matters. Dr. Henderson has some concerns about program protocols." Before James could press further, his phone rang. Roosevelt High School's number flashing on the screen. He excused himself to take the call in the hallway. The chemistry lab had experienced an electrical malfunction. The specimens for tomorrow's advanced placement demonstrations were at risk of spoiling without proper refrigeration, and the substitute teacher was unsure how to proceed. James ran a hand through his hair, torn between responsibilities. "I need to go to the school," he told Victoria after explaining the situation. "Those specimens took weeks to prepare, and the AP exam is coming up. But Lily's treatment still has 3 hours left." "Go," Victoria said without hesitation. "I'll stay with Lily. I've cleared my schedule for the afternoon." James hesitated, the offer simultaneously generous and unsettling. "Are you sure? Don't you have a company to run?" "I have an excellent executive team. Occasionally they should earn their exorbitant salaries without my direct supervision." A hint of humor softened her words. "Besides, Lily and I have star facts to discuss." James knelt beside Lily's bed, explaining the situation. Lily took the news with the resilience that continually amazed him. "It's okay, Dad. Those are for your big kids test, right? They need it more than me right now." She lowered her voice to a stage whisper. "And Victoria will be here. We'll be fine." The easy trust between Lily and Victoria formed in just 2 meetings, both reassured and slightly unnerved James. He thanked Victoria again and hurried to the school, promising to return as quickly as possible. Roosevelt High's aging infrastructure had been problematic for years, with the science wing particularly susceptible to electrical issues. James found the substitute teacher, a recent college graduate named Marcus, standing helplessly before the darkened refrigeration unit at that house delicate bacterial cultures and chemical compounds. The maintenance guy says he can't get here until tomorrow, Marcus explained, clearly stressed. Something about a plumbing emergency at the elementary school. James set down his bag and rolled up his sleeves. Let me take a look. Years of maintaining his own home on a teacher's salary had made James proficient in basic repairs. He located the building's electrical panel, identified the tripped breaker, but quickly determined that simply resetting it wouldn't solve the underlying problem. With systematic precision, James traced the circuit, finding a corroded connection in the ancient wiring that fed the laboratory's refrigeration system. The fix required parts from the hardware store and an hour of careful work. But by late afternoon, the unit hummed back to life, the valuable specimens saved. The school principal, Dr. Abernathy, found James washing grease from his hands in the lab sink. Marcus tells me you saved the day, again. The older man leaned against a lab bench. You know, the district has maintenance personnel for these things. In theory, James dried his hands on a paper towel. In practice, we both know how long that work order would have taken. Dr. Abernathy nodded, conceding the point. Your dedication to this school goes far beyond your teaching duties, James. The students are lucky to have you. James shrugged off the compliment, uncomfortable as always with praise for doing what seemed obvious. The AP students have been working toward this exam all year. They deserve every advantage we can give them. As James gathered his things to return to the hospital, Dr. Abernathy cleared his throat awkwardly. I received a call yesterday from Reynolds Pharmaceuticals about your situation with Lily. They've arranged for a long-term substitute if needed, all expenses covered. He hesitated. That's quite a connection you've made. Lily was accepted into their treatment program. The CEO is taking a personal interest in her case. James kept his explanation deliberately vague, still unsure himself of the full dynamics at play. Well, it's good news for Lily, and we'll support whatever schedule you need. The principal clapped him on the shoulder. Just don't let a pharmaceutical company steal away my best science teacher permanently. The comment, meant as lighthearted, lingered with James as he drove back to the hospital. What exactly was happening with Victoria Reynolds? Her interest in Lily made sense given her sister's history, but the level of personal involvement, staying through treatments, arranging support with his school, went far beyond professional courtesy. James found Victoria and Lily deep in conversation about marine bioluminescence, the treatment nearly complete. Victoria's suit jacket was draped over a chair, her professional armor partially shed in the comfortable atmosphere she and Lily had created. Dad, Victoria knows about glowing sea creatures. They make light with chemicals just like our glow sticks from the Science Museum. Lily's eyes sparkled with excitement, her pallor less pronounced than James had seen in months. Victoria smiled, rising from her seat beside Lily's bed. And Lily has been teaching me about neutron stars. Apparently, a teaspoon would weigh 1 billion tons. That's right, James confirmed, dropping his bag beside the chair Victoria had vacated. Sorry that took longer than expected. The wiring in that building predates most of the teachers. You fixed it yourself? Victoria's surprise was evident. Dad can fix anything, Lily stated with absolute confidence. He built my whole telescope stand from scratch and rigged it so I can move it myself even when my arms are tired. Victoria's gaze shifted between father and daughter, something unreadable in her expression. That's an impressive skill set for a science teacher. Necessity is the mother of invention. James deflected the implicit praise. Teacher's salary plus medical bills equals becoming a YouTube-certified handyman. The nurse arrived to remove Lily's IV, signaling the end of the treatment session. As they gathered Lily's books and prepared to leave, Victoria's phone buzzed with an incoming call. Her expression tightened as she checked the screen. I need to take this. Go ahead to the car. I'll be right there. She stepped into the hallway, her voice immediately shifting to the clipped, authoritative tone James now recognized as her business persona. In the hospital corridor, James caught fragments of her conversation. Absolutely unacceptable. Board-approved protocol. Personal vendetta. Victoria's posture had stiffened, one arm wrapped protectively across her midsection, the other gripping the phone with white-knuckle tension. When she joined them at the elevator, her expression was carefully neutral, but James sensed the underlying tension she was working to conceal from Lily. Everything okay? He asked quietly as they entered the elevator. Nothing that can't be handled. Victoria's smile was tight, professional. How about ice cream before heading home? There's an excellent place just a few blocks from here. The abrupt change of subject was clearly deliberate, but Lily's enthusiastic response made it impossible to press further. The ice cream parlor was an old-fashioned establishment with handmade waffle cones and dozens of flavors. Watching Lily deliberate over her choice with the serious concentration she applied to all decisions, James felt a surge of gratitude for this moment of normalcy. Victoria selected a simple vanilla in a cup, while James opted for coffee. Lily finally settled on cotton candy with rainbow sprinkles, the vivid blue confection a stark contrast to Victoria's restrained choice. They found a table near the window, sunshine streaming across the worn wooden surface. This is my first ice cream outing in, Victoria paused, seemingly calculating. At least 3 years. James raised an eyebrow. The CEO of Reynolds Pharmaceuticals doesn't make time for ice cream? The CEO of Reynolds Pharmaceuticals doesn't make time for much beyond quarterly reports and research proposals. A shadow crossed her face. My life has become rather streamlined. That sounds lonely, Lily observed with a child's direct perception, blue ice cream already circling her mouth. Victoria looked momentarily startled by the assessment, then nodded slowly. I suppose it is sometimes, but it's allowed me to build a company that helps people like you. Still lonely, though. Lily licked her spoon thoughtfully. Dad says everyone needs a person, someone who cares if you come home at night. James felt heat rise in his face at having his private conversations repeated. Lily, he's right. Victoria's voice was soft, her gaze fixed on her barely touched ice cream. Everyone does need that. The moment hung between them, fragile and loaded with unspoken significance. James searched for a response that wouldn't overstate or diminish whatever was happening. But before he could speak, Victoria's phone buzzed again. This time, her expression shifted to something closer to alarm as she read the message. I need to make a call. Excuse me for a moment. Outside the ice cream shop, Victoria paced along the sidewalk, phone pressed to her ear, free hand gesturing emphatically. Through the window, James watched the transformation he'd seen several times now. The compassionate woman who sat with Lily becoming the formidable executive. Two sides of the same complex person, both equally genuine. When she returned, her professional mask was firmly in place. I apologize, but I need to return to the office immediately. A situation has developed that requires my attention. Is it about me? Lily asked with surprising perception. The doctor today didn't seem happy you were there. Victoria hesitated, clearly weighing how much to share. It's complicated adult business, nothing for you to worry about. James recognized the deflection. I can drive us home from here. Thank you for staying with Lily today. Victoria seemed about to say more, but instead simply squeezed Lily's shoulder gently. I'll check in tomorrow to see how you're feeling after this treatment. James watched her leave, noting the increased tension in her stride, the way her hand gripped her phone like a lifeline. Whatever situation had developed, it clearly concerned Lily's treatment. The next morning dawned with Lily feeling remarkably well, the expected post-treatment fatigue notably absent. She ate a full breakfast and asked to try a simple science experiment James had promised earlier in the week, creating crystal formations with borax solution. As they carefully measured ingredients at the kitchen table, James's phone rang. Victoria's name appeared on the screen. How is Lily this morning? Her voice sounded strained beneath its professional veneer. James watched his daughter carefully stirring the solution. Better than expected. No fever, good appetite. We're growing crystals. Good, that's good. Victoria paused, the silence stretching uncomfortably. James, there's a situation developing that you should be aware of. The formal tone set off warning bells. What kind of situation? My ex-husband, Richard Mercer, is challenging Lily's inclusion in the treatment program. He's called for an ethics review, claiming I've shown improper favoritism and bypassed standard protocols. The words came out clipped, precise. He's holding a press conference at noon today to discuss ethical concerns in clinical trial administration. James felt his stomach drop. He's using my daughter as a weapon against you. Yes. The single word carried a weight of anger and regret. I've called an emergency meeting with the ethics committee this afternoon. I wanted to warn you that this might become Public. Public? What do you mean? Richard has media connections. Your name won't be released officially, but information has a way of leaking. Victoria's voice hardened. I'm doing everything I can to shield you and Lily from this, but you should be prepared. After ending the call, James sat heavily at the kitchen table, watching Lily innocently conducting her experiment, unaware of the corporate storm brewing around her treatment. By mid-afternoon, the situation had escalated beyond James's worst expectations. A local news station ran a story about questions of impropriety in Reynolds Pharmaceuticals' rare disease program, specifically mentioning the CEO's personal involvement with a particular patient's family. While no names were used, the implication hung in the air like a guillotine blade. James's phone rang repeatedly, colleagues from school, Lily's regular doctor, even Mrs. Winters wanting to know if the news story concerned them. He answered only Victoria's calls, which came with increasing frequency as the day progressed. The ethics committee wants to meet with you, she informed him at 4 o'clock. Tomorrow at 9 o'clock a.m. at Reynolds headquarters. Me? Wife home. James moved to the backyard to keep the conversation from Lily's ears. Standard procedure when concerns about patient selection are raised. Victoria's voice had taken on the distant quality James recognized as her professional armor. I'll be recused from the meeting due to conflict of interest. And if they rule against Lily's inclusion in the program? The question he'd been afraid to ask. Victoria's pause spoke volumes. Let's not borrow trouble. The treatment is already showing positive results. That carries significant weight. After hanging up, James stared at the overgrown grass of his backyard, anger building in his chest. Lily had already endured so much. The disease, the failed treatments, the loss of her mother. Now she was a pawn in a corporate power struggle, her chance at recovery threatened by a man she'd never met, all because of a misdirected text message that had somehow bypassed the bureaucracy meant to bury her case. That evening, a second news story aired featuring Richard Mercer himself, a polished, silver-haired man with cold eyes and a practiced, concerned expression. While he never mentioned Lily by name, his allusions to the CEO's special interest case and questions about what personal connection might exist carried unmistakable insinuations. James put Lily to bed early, reading extra chapters from her favorite book to ensure she was soundly asleep before allowing himself to process the day's events. When his phone rang again at 9:30, he was sitting in the darkened kitchen, a cold cup of coffee before him. May I come by? Victoria's voice sounded different, strained, less controlled. There are things we need to discuss before tomorrow's meeting, and I'd rather not do it by phone. 20 minutes later, her Audi pulled up outside. Victoria emerged wearing jeans and a simple sweater rather than her business attire, her hair loose around her shoulders. The transformation was striking. Without her corporate bear armor, she appeared both younger and more vulnerable. James led her to the kitchen, where he'd finally made fresh coffee. Victoria accepted a mug gratefully, wrapping both hands around it as though seeking warmth despite the mild spring evening. Richard is escalating this beyond anything I anticipated, she began without preamble. He's implying that there's an inappropriate relationship between us that influenced Lily's acceptance into the program. James felt heat rise in his face. That's ridiculous. We met because of the program, not before it. Facts are largely irrelevant in situations like this. It's about perception and narrative. Victoria's knuckles whitened around the mug. He's painting me as emotionally compromised, making decisions based on personal connections rather than scientific criteria. But Lily qualified for the program. You said her application was deliberately buried. Yes, and that's what makes his attack so insidious. Victoria set down the mug with controlled precision. He's taken a situation where he was clearly in the wrong and twisted it to make me appear unethical. James processed this, anger building again. So what happens now? The ethics committee will review Lily's case tomorrow. They'll interview you about how she came to be admitted to the program. They'll want to know about our relationship. Victoria met his eyes directly. Be completely honest. Any attempt to conceal or misrepresent facts will only strengthen Richard's position. And if the committee rules against Lily's inclusion, if they remove her from the treatment program, the possibility physically hurt to contemplate. Victoria's expression softened. I won't let that happen, James. Even if I have to. She stopped abruptly. Have to what? Victoria looked away. There are other options we can explore if necessary. James recognized the evasion. You're thinking about resigning, aren't you? Stepping down to protect the program. The slight stiffening of her shoulders confirmed his guess. It's a complex situation with multiple potential resolutions. That's corporate speak, or yes. James stood abruptly, pacing the small kitchen. This is insane. You built that company to help children like Lily, and now you might have to leave it because you're actually fulfilling that mission. The company has evolved beyond my original vision, Victoria said quietly. When you build something of that size, eventually it develops its own momentum, its own priorities. The rare disease division has been under financial pressure for years. Richard is simply exploiting existing tensions. James stopped pacing, struck by a sudden realization. Pull Lily from the program. Victoria looked up sharply. What? Remove Lily from the trial. I'm withdrawing her effective immediately. The words came out with certainty that surprised even him. I won't be the cause of you losing the company you built. Absolutely not. Victoria's response was immediate and firm. Lily's already showing improvement. The treatment is working. And there must be dozens, hundreds of other children who need it too. James leaned against the counter, arms crossed. Children you can't help if Richard succeeds in pushing you out. I won't let my daughter be the reason you lose everything you've worked for. Victoria stood, closing the distance between them. Listen to me very carefully, James Parker. I made a promise 20 years ago to my sister that I would help children like her. Lily is exactly why I built Reynolds Pharmaceuticals. I will not abandon her treatment to appease Richard's vendetta or to protect my position. The fierce determination in her eyes caught James off guard. In this moment, she was neither the corporate ice queen nor the gentle woman who sat with Lily. She was something else entirely, a force of nature bound by a decades-old promise. Besides, she added, her voice softening slightly, withdrawing Lily now would be an admission of wrongdoing. It would validate Richard's accusations. James sighed, running a hand through his hair. So we face the committee tomorrow. We face the committee. Victoria's phone buzzed with an incoming message. She checked it, her expression darkening. And it seems Richard has been busy. He's distributed a dossier to committee members suggesting improper communications between us prior to Lily's admission. What? That's completely false. He's using the text message, James. Victoria's voice was tight with controlled anger. The one you accidentally sent me. He's presenting it as evidence we had a personal relationship before Lily's admission to the program. James felt the blood drain from his face. How did he even get that? He has allies within the company. My phone records would have been accessible to him through channels I didn't anticipate. Victoria's jaw tightened. He's deliberately misrepresenting the timeline, suggesting the text came before your application rather than after months of attempts. The manipulation was breathtaking in its calculated cruelty. James slumped back into his chair, overwhelmed by the escalation of events from a simple texting error to a full-blown corporate ethics scandal. I'll resign from the program, he said finally. I'll make a public statement that we've decided to pursue other treatment options. That should end his leverage. Victoria was already shaking her head. First, that wouldn't stop him. He'd simply use it as proof his accusations were valid. Second, her voice softened, Lily needs this treatment, James. You know that better than anyone. There has to be a solution that doesn't involve either Lily losing her treatment or you losing your company. Victoria's phone buzzed again. She checked the message, a flicker of surprise crossing her face. Dr. Henderson is requesting a meeting with both of us, now. The research director? At this hour? He says it's urgent. Victoria was already gathering her purse. He wants to meet at the research facility. Can Mrs. Winters stay with Lily? James called his neighbor, who arrived within minutes, concern evident on her kind face, though she asked no questions. 20 minutes later, James found himself following Victoria's Audi through the nighttime streets of the city to a modern glass building bearing the Reynolds Pharmaceuticals logo. The research facility was largely deserted at this hour, the security guard recognizing Victoria immediately and waving them through with deferential efficiency. Dr. Henderson awaited them in a conference room, his typically immaculate appearance showing signs of strain. tie loosened, hair slightly disheveled. Thank you for coming. His gaze moved between them, lingering on Victoria. What I'm about to share involves significant risk to my position, but I can no longer remain silent. He placed a flash drive on the table. This contains complete records of all applications to the Harrington syndrome trial for the past year, including internal communications about candidate selection. Victoria stared at the drive. You've been collecting evidence? Since I began noticing patterns in the rejection data 6 months ago. Dr. Henderson straightened slightly. Richard Mercer has been systematically blocking applications with specific demographic profiles, primarily children of single parents, low-income families, and minorities. James felt his stomach turn. He's been cherry-picking patients based on socioeconomic factors? Worse, he's been selecting based on publicity potential and ability to generate positive press coverage. Dr. Henderson's disgust was evident. Photogenic children from wealthy, well-connected families receive priority, regardless of clinical need. Victoria's expression hardened into something James had never seen before, a cold fury that transformed her features. How many children have been affected? 43 cases that I've confirmed, likely more. Dr. Henderson pushed the drive toward Victoria, including notes from Richard explicitly flagging Lily Parker's case for rejection when he saw your personal notation of interest. Victoria picked up the drive, her hand visibly trembling with suppressed rage. Why are you giving me this now? Because I was a coward before. Dr. Henderson met her gaze directly. I knew something was wrong, but I feared for my research funding, my position. Today, Richard approached me about testifying against you at tomorrow's ethics committee. He promised increased funding for my department if I corroborated his version of events. The confession hung in the air, damning in its implications. And now, Victoria's voice was dangerously quiet. Now I'm choosing which side of medical ethics I want to stand on. Dr. Henderson gestured to the drive. Everything is there. Communications, selection criteria alterations, explicit instructions to bury certain applications. I've already sent copies to 3 members of the board I believe are beyond Richard's influence. The drive lay between them like a live grenade, its potential to destroy careers and reputations or to save children's lives contained in its small plastic casing. This changes everything for tomorrow's meeting, Victoria said finally, pocketing the drive. The committee will need to see this evidence. Dr. Henderson nodded grimly. I'm prepared to testify to its authenticity and to face the consequences of my previous silence. As they left the research facility, the night air cool against his face, James struggled to process the revelations. The personal vendetta against Victoria had masked a larger, more systematic corruption, one that had potentially denied life-saving treatment to dozens of children like Lily. Victoria stood beside her car, the drive clutched in her hand, expression distant as she processed strategic implications. The corporate warrior was fully present now, calculating moves and counter-moves in a battle with much higher stakes than James had realized. I should get home to Lily, he said finally, breaking the heavy silence. What time should I be at Reynolds tomorrow? Victoria refocused on him, something vulnerable flickering briefly beneath her strategic exterior. 8:30. We'll meet before the committee session. She hesitated, then added, Thank you for being willing to withdraw from the program to protect my position. It was unexpected. The simple acknowledgement carried more weight than effusive gratitude would have. James recognized it as a rare admission of being caught off guard, something he suspected didn't happen often to Victoria Reynolds. It was the right thing to do. James shrugged slightly. I teach my students that integrity isn't about grand gestures. It's about the small choices we make when no one's looking. The willingness to sacrifice personal benefit for larger principles. Victoria studied him with an expression he couldn't quite read. An increasingly rare philosophy in today's world. Maybe, but not an extinct one. James held her gaze. Get some rest, Victoria. Tomorrow will be challenging for both of us. As he drove home through the quiet streets, James reflected on the extraordinary series of events set in motion by a single misdirected text. From catastrophic mistake to life-changing connection. From corporate politics to ethics violations. From personal vendetta to systematic corruption. All emerging from 13 careless words sent to the wrong person. What had begun as a desperate father's last attempt to save his daughter had evolved into something far more complex. Tomorrow would determine not just Lily's treatment future, but potentially the direction of Reynolds Pharmaceuticals itself, the fate of dozens of children denied proper consideration, and the professional legacy of everyone involved. James Parker, high school science teacher, single father, accidental catalyst, found himself at the center of a storm he never could have anticipated. Yet as he thought of Lily sleeping peacefully at home, already showing signs of improvement from the treatment, he knew with absolute certainty that he would walk into that ethics committee tomorrow and fight with everything he had. Not just for his daughter, but for every child Richard Mercer had deemed unworthy of consideration. For Victoria and the promise she'd made to her sister. For the principle that medical treatment should be based on need, not publicity, potential, or socioeconomic status. Some battles chose you. This one had found James through a texting error, but he would see it through to whatever end awaited them all tomorrow. Morning light filtered through the blinds of Reynolds Pharmaceuticals' executive conference room as James adjusted his tie for the fifth time. The borrowed suit from his neighbor felt slightly too tight across the shoulders, a physical reminder of how out of place he was in this world of corporate power. Victoria sat at the far end of the table, reviewing documents with laser focus, every inch the CEO despite the strain evident in the tightness around her eyes. They had arrived separately by mutual agreement. No need to provide additional fodder for Richard's accusations. Dr. Henderson stood near the window, checking his watch repeatedly. The flash drive with his evidence had been copied, its contents organized into presentations for the ethics committee. The 3 board members he trusted had received their copies at dawn. Now they waited for the proceedings to begin, the tension building with each passing minute. James pulled out his phone, checking for updates from Mrs. Winters, who was again watching Lily. The brief text, "Had breakfast, feeling good, working on science project," provided momentary comfort amidst the storm brewing around them. This was why he was here. Not for Victoria, not for corporate politics, but for his daughter and every child like her. The door opened, admitting 7 people in formal business attire, the ethics committee, composed of board members and senior medical staff. Their expressions revealed nothing as they took their seats around the large oval table. The committee chair, Dr. Eleanor Santiago, placed her tablet precisely before her. "We're convening this emergency session to address concerns regarding patient selection for the Harrington syndrome treatment and trial. Specifically, allegations that CEO Victoria Reynolds circumvented standard protocols to admit a specific patient." Her gaze swept the room, settling briefly on each face. "Ms. Reynolds has recused herself from committee deliberations but is present to provide testimony. Dr. Henderson, as research director, is here to address medical aspects of the case, and Mr. Parker represents the patient's family." James felt the weight of every gaze shift to him. The science teacher in a borrowed suit, suddenly the focal point of a high-stakes corporate drama. "Before we begin formal testimony, I must inform the committee that significant new evidence has come to light." Dr. Santiago tapped her tablet screen. 3 board members received documentation early this morning suggesting a pattern of improper influence in patient selection predating the case under review. This evidence warrants examination before proceeding. A murmur rippled through the committee members. A silver-haired man at the far end frowned deeply. "What evidence? I've received no such documentation." Santiago's expression remained neutral. "The materials were sent to select board members based on concerns about wider conflicts of interest, Mr. Chambers. Those concerns now appear justified." The door opened again, revealing Richard Mercer. Impeccably dressed in a tailored charcoal suit, he projected confidence and righteous concern. His gaze locked briefly with Victoria's, cold triumph gleaming in his eyes before he smoothed his expression into professional neutrality. "I apologize for my tardiness. I was informed this meeting would begin at 9:30. De Santiago's eyebrow arched slightly. "It was rescheduled for 9. All parties were notified last evening." Richard took the only remaining seat, directly across from James. A communication error, clearly. His smile never reached his eyes as he studied James with calculating assessment. "I presume this is Mr. Parker?" "Yes, though I fail to see why my presence was required at this meeting." Richard arranged his materials meticulously before him. The question of proper protocol in patient selection falls under clinical administration, not board governance. Your oversight of clinical trials makes your perspective relevant, Dr. Santiago countered smoothly, particularly in light of new evidence suggesting systematic manipulation of the selection process. Richard's composure wavered for just a fraction of a second. What evidence? Dr. Henderson stepped forward, sliding a USB drive toward the center of the table. Complete records of all applications to the Harrington trial for the past 12 months, including internal communications about candidate selection criteria and specific rejection directives. The air in the room seemed to crystallize with tension. Richard's smile hardened into something brittle. I'm not sure what amateur investigation you have been conducting, Henderson, but any communications regarding trial selection fall within established protocol parameters, including directives to automatically reject applications from single parents. Dr. Henderson's voice remained clinically detached. Or families below specific income thresholds, or your explicit instruction regarding Lily Parker's application, and I quote, "Bury this one. Victoria's showing personal interest." Richard's face flushed with anger. Those records are confidential and subject to context. Selectively presenting internal communications without the full context is provided in the documentation, Dr. Santiago interrupted, including systematic patterns demonstrating non-medical criteria applied to trial selection. She turned to James. Mr. Parker, when did you first apply for your daughter's inclusion in the Harrington syndrome trial? James straightened in his chair, drawing on years of presenting scientific concepts to skeptical teenagers. 4 months ago, we received 3 rejections, each citing different reasons. First, that Lily's case wasn't severe enough, then that it was too severe, and finally simply not eligible with no explanation. And how did you come into direct contact with Ms. Reynolds? The moment of truth. James met Victoria's gaze briefly across the table, then faced the committee squarely. I sent her a text message by accident. It was meant for someone else entirely. A personal message that went to Ms. Reynolds' number by mistake. She recognized my name from the application files and came to my home to discuss why Lily's case had been repeatedly rejected despite meeting all clinical criteria. Richard scoffed audibly. A convenient story. The content of this accidental message would be relevant to the committee's understanding. Heat rose in James's face, but he refused to be shamed. It was a personal message regarding a dinner date with someone else. Embarrassing certainly, but hardly relevant to this proceeding. On the contrary, Richard pressed, if the message was of a romantic nature, it establishes a pattern of personal relationship that influenced Ms. Reynolds' decision-making. Victoria spoke for the first time, her voice cool and controlled. The timeline is easily verified. Mr. Parker's application was rejected 3 times over 4 months. The misdirected text arrived after these rejections. Upon receiving it, I reviewed his application and discovered the irregular pattern of rejections, which prompted my investigation. Dr. Santiago nodded, making notes on her tablet. Dr. Henderson, your evidence suggests Mr. Parker's case was not isolated. Can you elaborate? Dr. Henderson activated the conference room display, bringing up a series of charts and data visualizations. Analysis of application acceptances and rejections over the past year reveals statistically significant discrimination against certain demographic profiles. Single-parent households were rejected at 3 times the rate of 2-parent families with similar clinical presentations. Families below specific income thresholds were rejected at 4 times the rate of wealthy families, despite identical medical criteria. The evidence unfolded methodically: emails, statistical analyses, explicit directives. With each new revelation, Richard's expression darkened while several committee members exchanged troubled glances. This is nothing but a coordinated attack on my professional reputation, Richard finally snapped. Victoria has never accepted the board's decision to place clinical trials under my oversight rather than hers. This manufactured evidence is clearly an attempt to undermine my authority. The data speaks for itself, Dr. Henderson countered. 43 children were denied potentially life-saving treatment based on non-medical criteria. Children whose applications matched or exceeded the clinical qualifications of those accepted. James felt sick imagining the families who'd received rejection letters. The parents who, unlike him, hadn't accidentally texted the CEO and discovered the truth. 43 children suffering needlessly while the adults in this room played power games with their lives. May I speak? James hadn't planned to interject, but something in him had shifted with each new revelation. Dr. Santiago nodded. The committee recognizes Mr. Parker. James stood, drawing on the presence he used to command attention in his classroom. I'm not a pharmaceutical executive or a medical researcher. I'm a high school science teacher and a father. What I'm hearing in this room isn't about protocols or procedures. It's about children's lives being used as pawns in a corporate power struggle. He opened his laptop, turning the screen to face the committee. While you've been discussing evidence, I've been analyzing the raw data Dr. Henderson provided. The statistical pattern is unmistakable, but numbers don't tell the full story. James navigated through the files, finding what he'd been searching for since receiving access to the data last night. These are the 43 children whose applications were rejected despite meeting or exceeding clinical criteria. I've spent the night cross-referencing their medical profiles with current research on Harrington syndrome progression. The room fell silent as James displayed his analysis. 17 of these children are likely now beyond the treatment window where this therapy would be effective. 6 more have probably developed complications that would make them ineligible for future consideration. That's 23 families who permanently lost their chance at this treatment because someone decided their demographic profile wasn't valuable enough. Richard shifted uncomfortably. Mr. Parker lacks the medical expertise to make such assessments. This emotional appeal has no place in a scientific evaluation. On the contrary, Dr. Santiago interjected, studying James's analysis. Mr. Parker's scientific methodology appears sound. His background in biochemistry gives him sufficient foundation to interpret these progression timelines. She looked up, eyebrow raised. How did you access and analyze this data so quickly? James closed his laptop. I teach advanced placement chemistry and biology. Interpreting research protocols and analyzing data is what I do every day, just with younger subjects. When Dr. Henderson shared the complete files last night, I recognized patterns similar to those we use in predictive modeling exercises. Victoria was watching him with an expression he couldn't quite read, something between surprise and a deeper appreciation. Even Richard seemed momentarily taken aback by the unexpected expertise from the science teacher he'd clearly dismissed. The committee will recess for 30 minutes to review all evidence presented. Dr. Santiago stood, gathering her materials. When we reconvene, we'll hear closing statements before deliberation. As committee members filed out, Victoria approached James, keeping a professional distance but speaking quietly. That analysis, you did that overnight? James nodded. Between midnight and 4 a.m., the data patterns were clear once I organized them properly. Those rejections weren't random. They followed a specific prioritization model. Targeting families with media connections and publicity potential, Victoria finished his thought. Exactly what Richard would value. The door opened again, admitting Richard with a public relations executive James recognized from the previous day's news coverage. They spoke in hushed tones, Richard gesturing emphatically while checking his watch. He's planning something, Victoria murmured. That's Diane Maxwell, his media handler since the divorce. James watched their interaction, noting the urgent body language. Whatever it is, it's happening soon. The answer came 15 minutes later, as committee members began returning to the room. Dr. Henderson rushed in, face flushed with exertion. Richard's called a press conference. It's happening now in the main lobby. He's going public with accusations before the committee can rule. Victoria's expression hardened into something James hadn't seen before. Not the corporate mask or the compassionate woman who sat with Lily, but something dangerous and determined. He's trying to force our hand, create a public narrative the committee can't contradict without seeming to cover up ethical violations. James checked his phone. 3 missed calls from Roosevelt High and a text from Mrs. Winters. TV news van outside your house. What's happening? The situation was escalating beyond the boardroom. Richard was taking his vendetta public, dragging not just Victoria but Lily into the spotlight. The protective father in James warred with the analytical teacher, emotions clashing with strategic thinking. We need to get ahead of this, Victoria was already moving toward the door. The committee won't reach a decision if public opinion has already been shaped against us. What are you going to do? James fell into step beside her. Counter his narrative with the truth. Victoria's stride lengthened as they approached the elevator. Richard excels at crafting partial truths into convincing lies. Our only defense is complete transparency. The elevator descended swiftly to the lobby level, where a crowd had already gathered around a hastily assembled podium bearing the Reynolds Pharmaceuticals logo. Camera crews from local stations positioned equipment while reporters checked recording devices. Richard stood slightly off stage, receiving last-minute grooming from an assistant. Victoria surveyed the scene, calculations visible in her expression. He's controlling the physical space, the messaging, the timing. We need to disrupt his narrative framework. In English, for the science teacher? James raised an eyebrow. A brief smile flickered across Victoria's face. We need to change the story he's telling before he can finish telling it. Richard approached the podium, camera lights intensifying as he adopted a grave expression of corporate responsibility. Thank you for coming on such short notice. As Executive Director of Clinical Operations at Reynolds Pharmaceuticals, I feel compelled to address serious ethical concerns that have recently come to light regarding our patient selection process. Victoria moved forward through the crowd, James following in her wake. The corporate employees parted instinctively for their CEO, creating a visible disruption that caused Richard to falter momentarily in his prepared remarks. Specifically, evidence suggests that our CEO, Victoria Reynolds, has used her position to grant special treatment to a particular patient with whom she has developed a personal relationship, bypassing established protocols that ensure fair and equitable access to potentially life-saving treatments. Cameras swiveled toward Victoria as she approached the side of the staging area. Richard's expression tightened, though he maintained his concerned facade. These actions, while perhaps well-intentioned, undermine the scientific integrity of our clinical trials and raise troubling questions about governance and oversight within Reynolds Pharmaceuticals. An ethics committee is currently reviewing these matters, but I felt a responsibility to address these concerns publicly given their serious nature. Victoria stepped onto the platform, the power dynamic shifting visibly as she positioned herself beside Richard. Her presence commanded attention, drawing all eyes despite Richard's position at the podium. As CEO of Reynolds Pharmaceuticals, I appreciate the opportunity to address these allegations directly and provide essential context Mr. Mercer has omitted from his statement. Victoria's voice carried naturally, requiring no microphone to reach the assembled journalists. What Mr. Mercer failed to mention is that he himself has been systematically manipulating the patient selection process for our Harrington syndrome trial, rejecting qualified applicants based on non-medical criteria including family structure, income level, and publicity potential. Murmurs rippled through the crowd as reporters sensed a bigger story than they'd anticipated. Richard's carefully crafted expression of concern fractured slightly. This is precisely the kind of defensive deflection that raises governance concerns. He attempted to regain control of the narrative. Ms. Reynolds is currently under ethics review for her actions, and this transparent attempt to shift focus. The Ethics Committee has received comprehensive documentation of Mr. Mercer's systematic discrimination against 43 children who met all clinical criteria for the trial, but were rejected based on demographic factors. Victoria's calm certainty contrasted sharply with Richard's increasingly defensive tone. This documentation includes Mr. Mercer's explicit written directives to block specific applications, including his instruction to bury the application of an 8-year-old girl solely because I had noted her case met all qualification requirements. James stepped forward now, joining Victoria on the platform. Richard's eyes widened in alarm at this unexpected development. My name is James Parker. My daughter Lily is the patient Mr. Mercer is referring to in his allegations. She was denied access to a potentially life-saving treatment 3 times despite meeting all clinical criteria, solely because Mr. Mercer saw her case as an opportunity to undermine Ms. Reynolds' authority. A reporter called out from the crowd, Mr. Parker, what is your relationship with Ms. Reynolds? James met the question directly. I'm a high school science teacher whose daughter has Harrington syndrome. My first interaction with Ms. Reynolds occurred after my daughter's 3rd rejection from the treatment program, when I accidentally sent her a text message meant for someone else entirely. That error led Ms. Reynolds to review my daughter's application personally and discover the systematic pattern of improper rejections orchestrated by Mr. Mercer. Another reporter pressed, "Is it true your daughter was immediately admitted to the program after this interaction with Ms. Reynolds?" "Yes, because she should have been admitted from her first application. As the ethics committee is currently confirming, my daughter met or exceeded all clinical criteria for inclusion." James gestured toward the elevator where Dr. Henderson now stood observing the impromptu press conference. The research director can confirm that her application was exceptional in its match with treatment protocols. Henderson stepped forward at this cue, his scientific authority adding weight to the counter-narrative developing before Richard's eyes. As research director, I can confirm that from a purely clinical perspective, Lily Parker was an ideal candidate for our treatment protocol. Her rejection was non-medical in nature and part of a disturbing pattern my team has been tracking for months. Richard attempted one final gambit. The timing and nature of Ms. Reynolds' personal involvement with Mr. Parker and his daughter clearly demonstrates. "Perhaps we should discuss the timing and nature of your involvement with Reynolds Pharmaceuticals' most prominent critics during our divorce proceedings, Richard." Victoria's voice remained professional but carried an unmistakable edge. "Or your meetings with competing pharmaceutical executives about potential employment while still overseeing our most sensitive research protocols." The blood drained from Richard's face as cameras pivoted back to him. Victoria had just publicly suggested corporate espionage, a far more serious accusation than the ethical concerns he'd raised. "This press conference is over." Richard stepped back from the podium, his media handler rushing to intercept approaching reporters. "All questions will be addressed through proper channels following the ethics committee's formal review." As Richard retreated from the lobby, pursued by journalists now hunting a bigger story than they'd expected, Victoria turned to address the remaining reporters directly. Reynolds Pharmaceuticals was founded with a mission to develop treatments for rare diseases other companies ignore because they aren't profitable enough. That mission remains our core purpose. The Ethics Committee is currently reviewing evidence of interference with that mission. We welcome their scrutiny and will implement all recommendations to strengthen oversight of our clinical trials. She turned to James. "Mr. Parker's daughter represents exactly the kind of patient our Harrington syndrome treatment was developed to help. Her improvement after just 2 treatments validates both the science behind our therapy and the ethical imperative to make it available to all qualified patients regardless of demographic factors." A final question came from the back of the crowd. "Will the 43 rejected patients now be reconsidered for the trial?" Victoria's gaze met James's briefly, something unspoken passing between them. "Yes, every application that meets clinical criteria will be reassessed immediately, with priority given to those at advanced disease stages. We're also exploring ways to expand the trial capacity to accommodate additional patients who qualify medically." The impromptu press conference dispersed as journalists rushed to file updated stories about corporate corruption and patient advocacy rather than the ethics violations Richard had planned to highlight. Victoria led James and Dr. Henderson back to the elevator, her professional mask firmly in place despite the victory they'd just achieved. "That won't be the end of it," Dr. Henderson warned as the doors closed. "Richard has allies on the board. The shareholders care more about quarterly returns than ethical patient selection." "Perhaps." Victoria's tone revealed nothing of her thoughts. "But public narratives shape shareholder perspectives. Richard just became a liability rather than an asset to anyone concerned about stock prices." When they returned to the conference room, the ethics committee had already reconvened, expressions grave as they reviewed tablets displaying breaking news coverage of the lobby confrontation. Dr. Santiago looked up as they entered. The committee would have preferred completing its review before public statements were made. "I agree completely." Victoria's response was diplomatic but unapologetic. "Unfortunately, Mr. Mercer forced the issue by organizing a press conference designed to undermine your deliberations with a premature public narrative." The silver-haired board member, Chambers, leaned forward. "Regardless of Mr. Mercer's actions, this public spectacle has created significant reputational exposure for Reynolds Pharmaceuticals. The board will need to address governance implications beyond the specific ethics concerns under review." Victoria met his gaze steadily. "The board should absolutely review governance structures that allowed a single executive to manipulate patient selection for personal vendettas. I welcome that scrutiny. The subtle power play wasn't lost on James. Victoria had effectively redirected the governance concern back to Richard's actions rather than her response to them. Santiago cleared her throat. The committee is prepared to deliver its findings regarding the specific case of Lily Parker's admission to the Harrington syndrome trial, as well as preliminary assessment of the broader evidence regarding systematic manipulation of selection criteria. The next 30 minutes unfolded with clinical precision as the committee detailed their conclusions. Lily Parker met all medical criteria for inclusion in the trial. Her initial rejections resulted from non-medical factors. Victoria's intervention, while unusual in process, was substantively appropriate given the circumstances, and sufficient evidence existed to warrant a comprehensive review of all rejected applications under Richard Mercer's oversight. However, Dr. Santiago concluded, the committee must also note that direct CEO involvement in individual patient cases creates potential conflicts of interest, regardless of intentions. We recommend establishing an independent review board for all clinical trial selections going forward, with transparent criteria and multiple levels of evaluation to prevent similar situations in the future. Victoria nodded. I fully support that recommendation. The events of recent weeks have exposed weaknesses in our governance structure that must be addressed systematically. Chambers wasn't satisfied. The governance question extends beyond trial selection protocols. Ms. Reynolds' personal involvement with a patient's family raises concerns about professional boundaries and judgment. James felt a flash of indignation at the implication. My daughter's medical treatment and any personal relationship that may have developed subsequently are entirely separate matters. Are they? Chambers raised an eyebrow. The appearance of impropriety can be as damaging as actual impropriety in matters of corporate governance. The board must consider whether Mrs. Reynolds' position as CEO is compatible with continued personal involvement with your family. The underlying ultimatum hung in the air. Victoria could remain as CEO or continue developing a relationship with James and Lily, but not both. The boardroom fell silent as the implications settled. Victoria's expression revealed nothing of her internal response to this effective ultimatum. The Ethics Committee has confirmed that my intervention in Lily's case was medically justified. Any personal connection that developed afterward resulted from shared concerns about children with Harrington syndrome, a cause central to Reynolds Pharmaceuticals' founding mission. Nevertheless, Chambers pressed, the board will require assurance that no future conflicts of interest will arise. We have a fiduciary responsibility to shareholders that transcends individual relationships. James understood the subtext perfectly. The board would use this situation to control Victoria, to extract concessions regarding the unprofitable rare disease division, to prioritize shareholder returns over the mission she'd built the company to pursue. If I may, James stood, addressing the committee directly, you're discussing governance and appearances and shareholder value. But there's a more fundamental question at stake. What is Reynolds Pharmaceuticals for? Chambers frowned. That's hardly relevant to the ethics review at hand. I disagree. James moved to the front of the room, the teacher in him naturally commanding attention. Ms. Reynolds built this company with a specific purpose, developing treatments for rare diseases other companies ignore because they aren't profitable enough. That purpose is now in conflict with shareholder demands for maximum returns. The governance question isn't about my daughter's treatment or Ms. Reynolds' personal relationships. It's about whether this company will honor its founding mission or abandon it for financial expedience. Dr. Santiago studied him with newfound interest. What would you propose, Mr. Parker? James hadn't planned this intervention, but the path forward crystallized as he spoke. Expand the Harrington syndrome trial, not just to the 43 children wrongfully rejected, but to every medically qualified applicant nationwide. Demonstrate that Reynolds Pharmaceuticals places medical efficacy above financial metrics when lives are at stake. That's completely impractical, Chambers objected. The cost implications alone calculate the lifetime medical costs for these children without effective treatment, James countered. Compare that to the potential value of restored health, productive lives, and families not devastated by preventable suffering. As a society, we pay either way, either for treatment now or for the consequences of withholding it later. He turned to face Victoria directly. The evidence we've uncovered doesn't just indict Richard Mercer. It challenges this entire company to rediscover its purpose. These 43 children represent exactly who Reynolds Pharmaceuticals was built to serve. Will you fight for them as fiercely as you fought for Lily? The question hung in the air between them. Professional, yet deeply personal. Victoria held his gaze, something resolving in her expression. Yes. She turned to face the committee. Mr. Parker is right. This isn't just about correcting Richard's manipulation of the selection process. It's about recommitting to our core mission. I'm directing an immediate expansion of the Harrington trial to include all clinically qualified applicants, funded by reallocating the executive bonus pool if necessary. Chambers sputtered in protest, but Dr. Santiago was already nodding. From a medical ethics perspective, that's the most appropriate response to the systematic exclusion we've uncovered. Victoria continued, momentum building in her voice. Furthermore, I'm establishing an independent patient advocacy council with oversight authority for all clinical trial selections. This council will include medical professionals, patient representatives, and ethics experts with no financial interest in Reynolds Pharmaceuticals. The bold restructuring unfolded as Victoria reclaimed not just the narrative, but the fundamental direction of her company. James watched the transformation with a mixture of admiration and growing realization about what it might mean for whatever was developing between them. After the committee adjourned, Victoria was immediately surrounded by executives requiring guidance on implementing her directives. James stepped back, giving her space to reassert control over the organization that had nearly slipped from her grasp. Their eyes met briefly across the crowded room, a world of unspoken understanding passing between them. His phone buzzed with a text from Mrs. Winters. News van's gone. Lily feeling great, completed entire science project without resting. Something's happening, James. She's getting stronger. The message crystallized everything for James. While they'd been fighting corporate battles, the treatment was working. Lily was improving. Whatever personal complications existed between him and Victoria, the most important outcome was already being realized. He waited until the crowd around Victoria thinned before approaching. I need to get home to Lily. Victoria nodded, professional in the presence of lingering executives, but with something softer in her eyes. Of course, how is she today? Better, noticeably better. James showed her the text from Mrs. Winters. The treatment is working, Victoria. A genuine smile broke through her corporate facade. That's what matters most, isn't it? Everything else is just infrastructure. The moment of connection hung between them, weighted with everything they couldn't say in this public setting. James finally spoke the truth that had been clarifying throughout the morning's events. You know what Chambers was really saying? The board won't tolerate your involvement with us if you remain CEO. They'll use this situation to control you, to extract concessions about the rare disease division, to redirect the company away from its original purpose. Victoria's expression confirmed his assessment. Corporate governance is rarely subtle in its mechanisms of control. I won't be the reason you lose the company you built. James kept his voice low, meant only for her. Lily's treatment is secured now, and the other children will get their chance because of what you've done today. That's what matters. Understanding dawned in Victoria's eyes. James, you have a mission bigger than one child, bigger than one family. I won't ask you to choose between that mission and whatever might be developing between us. James stepped back slightly, creating professional distance. Lily and I will be fine. The treatment is working. That's victory enough. The pain that flashed across Victoria's face was quickly masked, but James saw it clearly. The woman beneath the CEO wrestling with impossible choices. Before she could respond, her assistant appeared with urgent messages from board members demanding explanations for her trial expansion announcement. Go, James said simply. Your company needs you. And 43 families need your company to remain true to its mission. As he walked away, James felt both the weight of what he was sacrificing and the certainty that it was the right choice. The connection with Victoria had been unexpected, powerful, and genuine. But her life's work affected thousands of children like Lily. That mission deserved her full commitment, uncompromised by conflicts of interest the board would exploit. 6 months passed in a whirlwind of changes. Lily's recovery progressed remarkably, each treatment building on the last until she was almost unrecognizable from the fragile child who had first entered the program. Her energy returned fully, then exceeded its pre-illness levels. Her hair grew back thick and vibrant. She returned to dance classes, thrived at school, and immersed herself in increasingly complex science projects. James received occasional updates about Victoria through news reports and pharmaceutical industry publications. She had indeed expanded the Harrington syndrome trial, personally overseeing the reassessment of every rejected application. 41 children eventually entered the program, with only 2 having progressed beyond the treatment window. Fewer than James had feared that night analyzing data. The corporate battle with Richard played out publicly, ending with his resignation and a carefully worded statement about pursuing other opportunities. Victoria emerged stronger, her authority within Reynolds Pharmaceuticals reinforced by improved clinical outcomes and positive media coverage of the expanded trial program. James maintained professional distance, never contacting Victoria directly, though he sometimes felt her presence in the thoughtful arrangements that continued to support Lily's treatment. Someone, he never knew who, ensured that scheduling always accommodated his teaching responsibilities. Small touches that suggested Victoria remained aware of their needs while respecting the boundaries he had established. In late October, Reynolds Pharmaceuticals announced a major restructuring. Victoria Reynolds would step down as CEO to become Director of Research and Development, focusing exclusively on the rare disease division she had built the company to pursue. The business press framed it as a strategic realignment, but James recognized the truth. She had chosen mission over position, purpose over power. 1 week later, Lily brought home a flyer for the district science fair, eyes shining with excitement. "Dad, I want to enter a project about immunology, about how my treatment works. Can we do it?" James studied the flyer, noting the location, Roosevelt High School, and the fact that Reynolds Pharmaceuticals was listed as a major sponsor. Coincidence seemed unlikely. "Of course we can," he told Lily, already calculating the appropriate complexity level for an 8-year-old's understanding of immunological mechanisms. "It's the perfect project for you." They worked on it together for weeks, James guiding without directing, encouraging Lily's natural curiosity while ensuring scientific accuracy. Her understanding of her own condition and treatment had deepened considerably, fueled by Victoria's original octopus analogy that had made complex immunology accessible to a child's mind. The day of the science fair arrived crisp and bright. Lily wore her favorite dress and carefully arranged her display board, positioning her journal from Victoria prominently among her research materials. The elementary school section occupied Roosevelt High's gymnasium, with Lily's project standing out for its medical sophistication and personal connection. James helped her make final adjustments to the display, then stepped back to allow the judges their evaluation. As he surveyed the room filled with proud parents and nervous children, he spotted her immediately. Victoria Reynolds, standing quietly at the back of the gymnasium, no longer in corporate attire but dressed in simple slacks and a blue sweater that matched her eyes. Their gazes met across the crowded space. 6 months of distance, of choices made and paths diverged, compressed into a single moment of recognition. Victoria moved toward him slowly, allowing him the option of retreat if that was his choice. James remained where he stood, watching her approach with the strange certainties that something fundamental had shifted, allowing new possibilities where before there had seemed only painful choices. "Hello, James." Her voice was softer than he remembered, unburdened by the corporate responsibilities she had carried when last they spoke. "Victoria, I didn't expect to see you here." She smiled, a genuine expression that transformed her face just as it had the first time he'd seen it. "I'm not CEO anymore, just the research director who helped develop the treatment your daughter is explaining to the science fair judges." Understanding bloomed between them. Victoria had reshaped her life, restructured her relationship with the company she'd built, created space where there might be no conflict between personal and professional worlds. "Lily will be thrilled to see you. She still talks about the octopuses that help her immune system." Victoria's eyes brightened with amusement. "The octopus analogy seems to have been effective educational methodology. Some teachers just have a natural gift," James said softly, the compliment hanging in the air between them. They stood together, watching as Lily enthusiastically explained her project to the judges, her health fully restored, her future once again limitless, all because of an accidental text message that had connected three lives in ways none of them could have anticipated. She looks completely recovered, Victoria observed, joy evident in her voice. She is. The treatment worked exactly as your research team predicted. James turned to face her directly. Thank you isn't enough for what you've done, not just for Lily, but for all the children in the expanded trial. It's why I built Reynolds in the first place, why I made the promise to Sophia. Victoria's expression softened with memory. Sometimes we lose sight of our purpose amid corporate politics and shareholder demands. You reminded me what matters. The science fair bustled around them, but they stood in a pocket of quiet understanding. Two people who had traveled a complex path to this moment of new beginning. I stepped back because I didn't want to be the reason you lost your company, James said finally, addressing what had remained unspoken between them. I never expected you to restructure your entire professional life. Victoria's smile held no regret. I didn't lose anything essential. I gained focus on the work that matters most to me. And perhaps, she hesitated, uncertainty rare in her expression, perhaps I gained the possibility of something new. Before James could respond, Lily spotted Victoria across the gymnasium and came running, face alight with excitement. Victoria, you came to see my project. Did you know it's about your octopus medicine? Victoria knelt to Lily's level, just as she had that first day on James's porch. I wouldn't have missed it. Scientists need to support each other's research. As Lily eagerly led Victoria to her display, explaining her methodology and findings with infectious enthusiasm, James watched them together. The brilliant, driven woman who had rebuilt her life to honor a promise to her sister, and the resilient daughter who had fought through illness with unflagging courage. Some mistakes, James reflected, watching the pair examine Lily's carefully constructed models of immune system responses, weren't mistakes at all. They were just unexpected paths to exactly where you needed to be.